Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Good afternoon, everyone. Apologies for being a bit late, but I'm running another meeting in another room. It's a great pleasure to be with us for those 2 days for this specific activity. It's a great pleasure to have you all. King Khalid Eye Specialist Hospital is a distinguished institution in the region that has been developing ophthalmology and training practices throughout the kingdom and the region for more than now probably 45 years. I'll try to make my speech very short, and I would like to welcome you all to the Clinical Trial Seminar at King Khalid Eye Specialist Hospital and Research Center. Whether you're here in our Riyadh auditorium or joining us virtually online from across the kingdom and beyond. Your presence reflects our shared commitment to advancing eye care in the kingdom and in the region. King Khalid Eye Specialist Hospital was established in 1983. It's the country's leading tertiary eye care center with at least 250 beds and 104,000 dedicated professionals. Our mission of delivering world-class care, training future leaders, and driving innovative research aligns with Vision 2030's healthcare transformation goals. Through partnership and research, we're pioneering ophthalmic solutions tailored to our region's need, from diabetic retinopathy to advanced gene therapies. Today's seminar focuses on clinical trials, which is the bridge between lab discoveries and patient care. At KKH, we are leading investigator-initiated and multi-center trials tackling challenges. Today, you will explore best practices, ethical considerations, and AI-driven data, and inclusive trial designs with steps towards making Saudi Arabia a hub for ophthalmic research. To our speakers and attendees, thank you for bringing in your expertise and energy. I encourage you to engage, question, and connect your ideas could spark the next landmark trial. At KKH, we believe vision is about seeing possibilities, and let's make this seminar a milestone in our mission to illuminate a healthier future. Thank you all for being part of this seminar, and thank you for being in this institution. We look forward to your contribution and your valuable expertise, and I wish you all the best of luck. Thank you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you all for coming for our clinical trials workshop today. Exactly 1 year ago, in 25th of September of 2024, the WHO issued a report about best practices in clinical trials. Today, we are very lucky to have our guest speakers. We will start with Dr. Monisha Nongpiur. Dr. Monisha is one of the sophisticated researchers. She is holding a number of posts in the Singapore Institute for Eye Health. She is also responsible for the clinical trials section. Mashallah, Dr. Monisha has around more than 150 international publications. Around 12 of them are very sophisticated landmarks in the field. Dr. Monisha is also on the editorial board of several sophisticated journals in the field and associate editor of some of them. Her special interest is actually glaucoma. However, she has created balance in her career between providing clinical services and conducted research. Today, Dr. Monisha is going to talk to us about a non-deducted lecture, but she is going to share her expertise down the road while conducting clinical trials, starting from the design into the implementation. What are the potential risk factors for failure? What are the factors for success? How do we maintain success while conducting the clinical trial? So I invite Dr. Nongpiur to come please to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Musa, for the kind introduction. I'd first like to thank Kekesh for the invitation for me to be here. Thank you. It's been a delight, and we had a lovely session yesterday. So some of which, what I'll be presenting is actually something that we had discussed in detail yesterday. So it's kind of a recap for some of them. So today I will go through with you some of the pearls or the best practices for success in conducting clinical trials, and also the common pitfalls or the challenges that we face, and how best to avoid them. So clinical trials are the backbone of medical progress, and effective management is absolutely essential because it ensures patient safety, data integrity, and the timely delivery of new therapies. And poor management can lead to delays, financial losses, and compromised research. So clinical trials is like a team sports, and where every player plays a vital role, and their coordination amongst them is essential for success of the trial. And these are the key components of clinical trial management that I will be going through. Some of them may not really be relevant for sponsored trials because a lot of it is taken over by the sponsors, but more relevant for investigator-initiated clinical trials. So coming to the first pearl, which is proactive planning and protocol design, I think a well-designed protocol is really half the work done. However, what is good on paper may not always be translated to successes on the ground. So while designing a protocol, it's important to ask, is it feasible? Do you have the patient pool, the resources, the expertise? And it's also important to engage with stakeholders early, whether it's clinicians, statisticians, or regulatory experts in the department, in order to identify processes early before you actually start the trial. And also to build a realistic budget and timeline which buffers for patient delays, screen failures, and protocol amendments. And the pitfall really is poor feasibility and overambitious planning, because this can lead to high failure rates, protocol deviations, and overburdened staff. So to avoid this, like I said previously, it's important to have realistic feasibility checks before starting the study and involving stakeholders early during the planning process. Now, the second pearl is site selection and preparation. So this is more relevant when you want to involve other collaborative sites in multi-center trials. So choose sites that have a strong track record with a dedicated team, and centers that have proper infrastructure. Provide clear SOPs and training in order to reduce variabilities and errors. So weak site engagement can lead to inconsistent protocol implementation, poor recruitment, and high variability. And some of the common causes of poor recruitment that we've encountered, because we do a lot of multi-center trials across in the region in Asia, is really it's mainly related to the absence or the limited resource for research or dedicated research space and manpower, and also sometimes limited patient pool as well. So in order to avoid this, select sites that are committed with a good track record and provide thorough training to staff and SOPs. So the third pearl is robust data management. I think we talked about this yesterday. Use validated electronic data capture for data quality, and avoid, of course, using Microsoft Excel. Implement periodic monitoring in order to ensure data is accurate and consistent, and also to highlight to either enter and report promptly all AEs and SAEs. And to avoid, some of the ways to avoid is actively monitoring for deviations and address them immediately so that you don't have recurrence, because this can be important because regulatory authorities look into this, how many deviations of the same kind that you have. Now, the fourth pearl is patient-centered recruitment and retention. So some of the strategies for improving patient recruitment is pre-screening databases and registries, and also sending reminders to clinicians regularly, because even when I'm recruiting, I mean, sometimes I forget for my own studies where I'm a PI, I forget to recruit. At the end, I'm like, oh my God, I should have recruited. So sometimes it's important to remind clinicians, because, and also not just the clinicians, PIs and co-Is, also to involve fellows and residents as well, and they help, and regularly reminding them can help. You can get them to help identify suitable patients for referral. And it's also important to maintain clear communications with patients during counseling, when you're counseling them for recruitment, to sit down with them and explain the logistics of their involvement, what is their commitment to the study, because we found that most of the missed or delayed follow-up visits occur because of patients' limited scheduling flexibility. So, and poor recruitment is the most common cause of trial delays and failures. And in this review paper, they've actually found that most of the causes for patient recruitment delays were actually preventable, and many of them were related. Some of the causes for poor recruitment were having overly strict criteria. So this is important when you're developing. Again, this goes back to looking at feasibility and recruitment and study design. Having unrealistic enrollment projections and limited patient pool. And what I mean by inadequate PI engagement is sometimes they forget to, so it's important to keep reminding them, especially the co-investigators, to help of what the criteria are, what kind of patients you're recruiting for the different trials. So one of the ways to avoid poor recruitment or retention is to have, to develop realistic criteria and timelines. And pre-screening patients is important, and also developing robust retention plans and including patients that have more flexible visit schedules, and maintaining regular communications with patients, sending them reminders of their follow-up visits. So the fifth pearl is effective communication, having regular team meetings and establishing clear goals and responsibilities of all the different team members. Regularly monitoring recruitment, and also establishing clear communication channels, because this can help in identification of problems early on so that they're addressed immediately to prevent recruitment delays or deviations. So poor communication coordination failure leads to protocol deviations, delays in recruitment, and which can lead to lapses in safety lapses and compliance issues. And also this can lead to low staff morale and frustration. So one of the ways to avoid is to have regular meetings, group meetings with stakeholders. And also what we found especially useful is to have, to communicate through instant communication channels like Teams. That's what we use, because and just not for everybody involved, but for people who are recruiting or with the PI, because a lot of the problems that they find can be easily addressed when they're recruiting patients. If they're not sure of, is this eligibility criteria okay, or is this disease okay? So it's very easy for them to then help with the recruitment. So this has been very useful. Now the sixth pearl is regulatory vigilance and compliance. So although easier said than done is to always be audit ready, this is difficult. We discussed this yesterday. What it requires is to have all your documentation should be current, and to stay up to date on all regulations, maintain strict GCP guidelines when recruiting patients or conducting the trials, and also to conduct internal audits, because these can help identify any of the issues and address them. And also it's important, like I said, to keep documentations current, because the timely, it's important for timely submission, especially when we're dealing with AEs and SAEs. So regulatory non-compliance can lead to audit findings, and if there are a lot of major findings during the audits, it can even lead to trial suspension. And also non-compliance can result in regulatory failures. So stay updated with all the regulations, and also maintain SOPs and regular trainings, and also conducting internal audits or quality control checks, periodic quality control checks, for especially in terms of data. Now, the seventh, pearl number 7, is budget and administrative management. So when planning budget, plan them with contingencies in mind, keeping buffer for delays as well as recruitment delays or delay in timelines. Ensure efficient resource allocation, and also when planning for timeline, very conservatively and not to be overambitious. And also it's important to regularly track both budget as well as timeline. Trials, one of the most common reasons why trials often, what we normally see is trials often exceed their initial budget and planned duration. And the common causes are usually unrealistic initial estimates, or when we underestimate manpower needs, unexpected protocol amendments, and also poor resource allocation. So this can be avoided by having more accurate budgeting and at the time of designing and planning the study that accounts for all contingencies and potential costs. And it's also important to review financials regularly. And the last pearl is risk-based trial monitoring. This is difficult. It's not easy to do because you have to have people trained to monitor. So there's a separate training for that. So it's important to adopt a risk-based monitoring system, and so that most of the resources for monitoring is allocated to the ones with the highest risk. And it's not established, rather it's engaged with independent oversight committees. We've done that before. They're very expensive, so if you have your own risk-based monitoring, it would be a lot better, cheaper. And also findings from these to use corrective, early, clear corrective and preventive CAPA pathways for any issues that are detected during the internal monitoring, so that these are not repeated or recur. So the consequences of inadequate monitoring and oversight is, of course, delayed detection of issues and regulatory non-compliance. And this can undermine both data integrity as well as patient safety. And some of the common causes are the lack of risk-based framework or processes, and also having inefficient quality, or not regularly looking into the data and seeing if they are correctly entered and there's no problem with data integrity, and also poor IP management. So to avoid this, have risk-based monitoring plans, and also address deviation or non-compliance early in order to prevent any recurrence and to maintain trial integrity. So I'll just like to end with just 2 more slides, one on, especially if you're dealing with investigational product. So IP accountability is absolutely essential, and it's important, and it's non-negotiable. So if you're dealing with IP drugs products, it's important to coordinate with sponsors early in terms of labeling, description, packaging, storage, and having documentation, both inventory and accountability, that can be that has an audit trail. And there's an additional training for staff who are assigned for IP management. There's some additional tasks that they need to be aware of. And also when it's important to investigate any discrepancies, document and investigate any discrepancies, especially when it comes to medications that are dispensed and returned. And finally, emerging technologies is something that is being used more now in clinical trials, such as AI, which is used for smarter recruitment, and wearable devices that allow us to collect real-time data. So with all of these, and trials now are larger, they are more multi-centered, and there's a lot more data, not just data, but a lot of images as well. So cloud storage platforms are what a lot of centers are doing that allows. So it's important to maintain secure sharing, and also secure storage as well as secure sharing when you're sharing across different institutions. So in order to embrace emerging technologies into clinical trials, it is important to have strong IT support, because in order to protect not just the data, but also patient safety as well. So in summary, the best practices for clinical trials is proactive planning. That's absolutely essential, with good feasibility tests or checks at the beginning, having a strong team as well as site relationships, and having open, clear communication channels and having robust data management and regular monitoring and training of staff. Some of the common pitfalls are underestimating the recruitment challenges, and most of this is not always related to limited patient pool. It can also be due to the workflow or the lack of dedicated research staff or research facilities or space. Poor documentation practices resulting in delayed AE or SAE reporting, and also poor financial management, which sometimes happen, especially when there are trial delays. So in terms of clinical trials, it's important to anticipate problems before they happen, and management is mainly about prevention, not just reaction. And what we found helpful is developing SOPs for different processes, which is easy when new staff come in, they go through these processes and then learn. Then they learn on hand, of course, on the job, but it's important to have SOPs. Thank you very much. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Professor Nongpiur. That was actually a very comprehensive lecture, as we expected. You walked us through the process and potential risk factors and how to maintain success. We would like to utilize the coming few minutes to, if the floor would have questions to Professor Nongpiur, please.
Thank you, Dr. Monisha. So I just want to ask, how do you ensure good data during the trial? So, for instance, say you're doing a trial about imaging or something, and you capture images and you realize at a certain stage that they're all poor quality, or they have certain artifacts and such. How do you kind of ensure data quality management from the start of the trial?
So before we start the trial itself, whoever is involved in data capture, imaging capture, they all go through a process, and there is training to see, so through different machines. And so if there is poor quality data, they do inform the PIs if there is, and if there are poor quality data, is it okay? And sometimes you can't help it, it's just bad cataract or something, but I think they do the maintaining quality is it's real time, it's at the point. It's not, we don't look at data later on and then realize. But of course, it's important to, I think with clinical trials, you're really not allowed to analyze data in between unless you're doing midterm analysis. But usually, so that's what we do. We get them to it's kind of real time evaluation of the images to see if it is, if the quality is good or not.
Thank you, Dr. Monisha, for a nice talk. My question is related to patient recruitment. So on a practical basis, someone wants to do a trial, and do you keep a registry of patients, or do you sort of scour your EMRs to see what you have, or what's the process for that in your institution?
In an ongoing trial, or before somebody comes?
A new trial that's coming, and you want to make, let's say a company comes and says, I need 100 patients from your site with this particular diagnosis. How do you go about doing that at your institution?
So we do have, we liaise with the resource person, and they do tell us how, so if it is recruiting trials, we do a feasibility checks to actually see how many patients can we recruit for that particular, depending on the eligibility criteria. So we go back to the clinic to, suppose it's cataract or it's glaucoma, and see how many kind of patients do we get. So that is really important. So we don't have a registry, because registry, currently we don't have that actually says this is the eligibility. It's not just diagnosis. You can't just say, I want glaucoma patients. So it's specific inclusion, exclusion criteria as well. So broadly, we do have an idea, because we work with the resource, the clinic. They do tell us how many new patients we see, how many kind of these patients we have. So that's with the SNEC clinic.
Thank you again. Now, from your practice now, when it comes to the designing the clinical trial, deciding on patient involvement, as well as in terms of all the intervention that be decided? Is it done at the level of the primary investigator, or is it going through the central office who will check and make sure things are going to a standard process?
It's at the level of the PI, because they are the ones, especially because the kind of trials that we have are sponsored. If it's investigator-initiated, it's either sponsored by the grant or internal funding. So if it's grant-sponsored, it's at the level of the PI, but they do involve the others to see is it feasible or not. Not always, but we encourage them to actually talk to us and see whether it's feasible with the kind of manpower that they have, which what the trial allows. So some trials are small, some trials are big. So depending on that, so we can kind of allocate resources adequately.
So from your position at the level of the clinical trial, so what kind of support you do for the primary investigation?
So it depends. So like I said, so if it is grant funded, then there's a lot more support for that, because then depending on the complexity of the trial, they can have a lot of manpower. But if it is smaller grants which are internally funded, then we have separate coordinators allocated for that. So then they hold, there are, for those trials, there's a lot more involvement of the PI as well. So what we tell them is to kind of work with the PI very closely on the workflow, so that you don't have, so if it's well funded, then you have a CRC with the patient all the time. But we run a lot of trials, there's not enough money for it. So for that, we talk with the PIs and get them to really be more invested, so that sometimes you may not have a CRC with the patient, and most of these patients come directly to the clinic. So to make sure that everything is recorded in the EMR system, which can then be transcribed into the clinical trial forms, clinical record forms. So yeah, so it really depends on funding.
Yes, okay. Thank you, Professor, for a very inspiring talk. You mentioned in your lecture the multi-site collaboration. So if there is interested staff to participate in existing clinical trials, is there any procedure that let's say there is existing clinical trial, and you mentioned that there is multi-site collaboration.
Yes.
Let's say a staff here is interested to participate in existing clinical trial.
It's like a site, if a site is interested in participating. But staff, really, we don't provide the staff for the multi-site trials. So that's why it's important to look at whether they have the resources to support the study or not. So it's not that the staff from the main site actually goes there. They don't. If I can understand correctly.
I meant that if, let's say, I'm interested to participate from our center.
Yes.
To participate with existing clinical trial with another center.
Right. Okay. Yes.
So, is there certain procedures?
Yeah, I think there has to be a project agreement. There's proper agreement that has to be done before you can actually recruit, and then there's protocol, IRB submissions that have to be provided you need to get prior approval through IRB in that particular center first before you can recruit patients. So usually for multi-site trials, it's always better to plan ahead when you're designing. But of course, sometimes we've included trials later on, but then the process takes a little while.
Any further questions? Maybe I will have the last question in this session. I just wanted to ask you about the timeline. Sometimes we know, according to sample size recruitment, available resources, and complexity of the process, we may exceed the timeline, which may be having restrictions from the donor or the funder sometimes, and from the institute itself. So in similar cases, what would be your recommendation?
Oh, you have to find alternate sources, really. So that's what we've been doing, philanthropic or other sources of funding in order to support. And if you have good justification of why there's been a delay, I think usually it's important to get additional funding. Otherwise, all the data you've collected would really go to waste. I just wanted to say one thing. One of the things that's really worked, sorry if I may, one of the things that's really made it a lot easy for us to run trials is having dedicated research fellows, because I think that is so critical, because we collaborate with other centers, and having patients coming to the clinic is always difficult to get slots for them, but when patients are seen in the research clinic alone, that's a lot easier, and it's easier for the CRCs, easier for the patients, and usually that is when we avoid having missed visits or follow-up visits. So having an in-house research fellow is also a critical thing.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Nongpiur, and we really enjoyed your lecture.
It's a pleasure to invite Professor Anthony King to deliver the next talk. Professor Anthony King is a consultant ophthalmologist with a glaucoma subspecialist interest in the UK. He also holds an honorary title as Professor of Ophthalmology in Nottingham in the UK. He's very prominent and is published widely, has more than 70 publications, many of which have been pivotal in glaucoma care and outcomes in glaucoma. He's been the principal investigator of the TAG study, which is the trabeculectomy in advanced glaucoma study, and it was a study which involved or recruited 450 participants over 27 sites in the UK. So there's a lot we can learn from Professor King about recruiting patients and about retaining patients. Professor King.
Thank you very much indeed for the kind invitation to be here and to talk about tags, which I always love talking about. When you described it there, you can see with those challenges why I have no hair left. So let's talk a little bit about the process that was involved in setting tags up more than anything else. So I think the context of this study is really important. This is a study that was undertaken within a publicly funded healthcare system and was an investigator-initiated trial. So for funding for something like this, you are competing for money against every other subspecialty, every other specialty in the country, cardiology, cancer. So you have to convince the funders that you have a very good case, a very important case to support. And the success rate for this sort of study in the UK, for this sort of application in the UK, is about 15%. So actually, you know, it's a very, very competitive field that we're entering into here. And I'll give you the background to why I think we were successful. So this is the RCT pathway as I see it. This is my experience. So everybody in this room has great ideas for clinical trials, I have no doubt about that. The thing is, you have to translate that idea into something which is attractive to people who want to fund it. And the way that you do that is, sorry, just quickly just give you some timelines there to give you the context about how much time is involved in not just setting up a trial, but delivering it. And we're talking about 12 years of my life here. So that is a long time. So I like to think of this pathway in two sections. First is the pre-funding, and secondly is the post-funding. And I think everybody who's considering doing a clinical trial should be made to watch Monisha's lecture that she's just given, because essentially she has summed up everything that's important for you to understand before even considering doing a trial. So, okay, I keep moving away, do I? Yeah. So you have to convince your funder, and in my case, this was the NHS, that this is an important question to answer. So how do we do that? So we have to demonstrate that there is an appropriate number of patients who need to be managed in this particular way. So for us, the TAG study, it was patients who were presenting with advanced glaucoma. So these weren't people who were already in the clinic, these were people who were presenting as newly diagnosed patients. So we were able to demonstrate from the literature and actually from some internal audits that we had that about 20 to 25% of patients were presenting with advanced glaucoma. So that's one thing in our favor. But probably more importantly is that the literature demonstrates that people who present with advanced glaucoma are very likely to go blind. About 50% of them are likely to go blind during their lifetime. So suddenly that becomes much more contextual for society and for the individuals involved. So we have a strong reason for wanting to improve our management. These are patients who are treated. These aren't patients who were untreated. These are in the system and they went blind despite being in the system. So we need to improve our management of these patients. And thirdly, we know that patients with advanced glaucoma are much more expensive to look after than patients with early glaucoma. So there is a societal cost to having patients with advanced glaucoma who aren't being monitored very well. So it's common, it's blinding, and it's expensive. So these are the arguments that you use going forward. It's very helpful, though, that if you have some evidence from current guidelines which indicate also that this is a question that hasn't been answered. So with the NICE guidelines, which is our sort of go-to guidelines in the UK for glaucoma, it says that there is no evidence to support advanced glaucoma, a trabeculectomy in advanced glaucoma, but we still recommend it. So there's an evidence gap there. The European glaucoma guidelines said we don't really know the answer, and the American preferred practice guidelines didn't even mention advanced glaucoma as an entity. So there is clearly a gap there in terms of differences between what we would consider authoritative guidelines. Within the UK also, we have this multi-stakeholder approach to identify important research priorities. This is called the James Lind Alliance, and this is fed into by stakeholders such as clinicians, charity organisations, patients, commissioners, and it identifies the top 10 research priorities for each of the disease entities that exist within medicine, and there is one for glaucoma. And so for us, we have to make any application we submit fits these James Lind Alliances. You don't have to fit all of them, but you just have to demonstrate that you're answering some of them. And then finally, I think it's always useful if there is a systematic review which is looking at your particular topic. So there's a Cochrane review which was looking at primary medicine versus primary surgical treatment for glaucoma. And one of the priorities that identified as a research priority at the end of the day was that there was an evidence gap for patients presenting with advanced glaucoma, and a randomized controlled trial comparing medical treatment against surgical treatment was required. So, going in with that sort of ammunition is very helpful in convincing a funder to give you £2 million to do a study, which is essentially what we were asking for. So we needed to support our argument. Then you need to think about who you are going to use as your collaborators to help you support this. And you want experts in the field, if you can get them, people who have knowledge of the topic that you are applying to get research funding for. And we've got Ted there, fantastic research background, run a randomized controlled trial. Keith, Augusto, and Jen, all Cochrane reviewers, and all have also run randomized controlled trials. So your clinical team is really, really important because they guide you. They see things in a different way to you. You're very enthusiastic as the chief investigator. Sometimes you just need people to bring you back down to earth again. So having a good team around you is amazing. But actually, for me, the key is the clinical trials unit. The clinical trials unit is the nerve center that allows you to run the trial. And the clinical trials unit are really the people such as the methodologists, the statisticians, the health economists, and the trial coordinators who essentially do all of that stuff that goes on in the background to make the trial work. And you want to approach these people early, because if you go with your idea, they'll just say no. You've got to just go back and do this and this and this. So if you go with your design, they'll go, no, you've got to go back and do this and this. But if you go with your idea, then they will say, actually, okay, that's a great idea. So how do you propose you're going to undertake it? No, you need to do this. So you need to get this advice really early on. And they are experts. And ideally, you want to approach a clinical trials unit because they're quite selective in the UK. They refuse quite a lot of approaches. You want to approach a clinical trials unit that has expertise in your particular subject. So the one that we chose was the chart in Aberdeen, which has expertise in glaucoma. Aberdeen is about 500 miles from where I live. So actually there was no locality in terms of this. This was about choosing the trials unit which you thought was going to be best to deliver your clinical trial. Now, it's not just all about us though, is it? We need other people to be convinced that this is an important topic. And also we need to convince people the people who are going to participate in the trial that it's an important topic. And also we need to know whether or not, even if we get funding, whether or not they will agree to participate in the trial, because that's one of the issues that particularly surgical against medical trials have. They're often very poor recruiters. So we did some qualitative research before we did our application, and we were particularly identifying whether or not patients felt that this was an important subject to them as glaucoma patients. We wanted to identify what they perceived as barriers to recruitment if we were going to start a trial, and we also wanted to know what they would feel were the solutions to those barriers for recruitment, so that when we went to get our funding, we'd anticipated the sorts of things that perhaps the funders would be asking us. So we needed to get the patients on our side, and that was a really useful bit of work which took about a year to do before we submitted our application, and it informed our study design. It's not just the patients though. As was mentioned, I needed 27 other centres to help me to recruit to this study. So I needed to know also that my colleagues were on board when it came to recruitment. So we did a survey of all UK ophthalmologists, and we wanted to identify whether or not they were following NICE guidelines, which are undertake primary surgery in patients with presenting with advanced disease. And we found that even amongst the glaucoma surgeons, only about 30% were offering a primary trabeculectomy to their patients. So we wanted to know why. And we found out two main reasons. Firstly, they didn't want to expose the patients to risks of glaucoma surgery. And there's this particular concept called wipeout, which I'm sure you're familiar with, where we're concerned that if we operate on somebody with advanced glaucoma, they will lose their vision. And secondly, they felt that there was no solid evidence base to support that as an intervention. Fair enough. And then the last thing we asked them was, if we got funded for a trial, would they be willing to recruit patients to it? And actually, the majority of them were. So when we went to the HTA with our application, we could say patients like this, colleagues like this, and they will recruit to the study, and we've got the names of all the sites that have agreed to recruit. So this is even before we put in our application. So it then comes to, what are our outcomes going to be for our trial that we haven't even applied for funding for yet? So I think there are three separate categories that you need to consider here. There is the patient-centered. So what patients want to know is their quality of life going to be good? Are they going to continue to be able to do everything that they want to do? So that's the patient-centered outcomes, quality of life. Then there's the clinical outcomes, which we love. Visual fields, intraocular pressure, how many drops patients are going to need to use afterwards, which are the things that really drive us as clinicians. That's important. And then you've got your health economic outcomes. The health economic outcomes are the most important outcomes to the NHS, because the NHS is looking how do we deliver effective healthcare most cheaply. That's the bottom line. So they wanted to know what that is. So when you come to choosing your primary outcome, you can only have one primary outcome. So you have to make a choice here about what is most important. So what we did, as it happened, was we calculated the primary outcome for each of these particular categories of potential outcome. And what we found was that the largest sample size requirement was for the patient-centered outcome. So that meant that we were powered also to identify clinical and health economic outcomes should we undertake the study. And as it happened, in the grant rounds that we were applying to, we had a bit of luck. They wanted our primary outcome to be a patient-centered outcome. So in a way, we were able to answer all of these questions within the sample size that we recruited. So when I was doing this many, many years ago, there wasn't much guidance outside my colleagues and my my clinical trials unit. But there has been great innovations now, and there is guidance out there for people who are planning to do these studies going forward. And also there is this algorithm for how to undertake trials at different stages of surgical development, not particularly relevant to TAGS because it was a device against medicine, established surgery against medicine, both mature interventions. But for more innovative surgical interventions, there's this guide here. We fall into the assessments guide, part of the guide, because it's an RCT comparing established interventions. So when it comes to it, and I've mentioned some of this before, you have to be really strategic about what you're doing in your study design. Your primary outcome, as I measured, needs careful consideration. Your endpoint. So I'm a glaucoma specialist. I know that realistically, there's going to be no probable difference in visual field outcome, which is what we really want to measure in glaucoma, for 5 years, whatever we do. Now, most funders aren't interested in funding a trial for 5 years because they don't even know if you're going to recruit successfully to the trial. So what they want is something much more tangible, something much more upfront. So we suggested that we have an endpoint at 2 years. An endpoint at 2 years, and we put in our application, and we will then apply for funding for an extension to 5 years if we are successful in recruiting. And of course, what they then see at 2 years when you're coming back to them is that this guy has done exactly what he said he was going to do. He's recruited his patients. He's reported his 2-year outcomes. This now becomes much more relevant. We're never going to get this cohort of patients again. We need to find out these outcomes. It makes it much easier for them to fund you through that final endpoint. Inclusion and exclusion criteria, really important, because the more inclusion and exclusion criteria you include, the more difficult it becomes for people to be recruited to the study. So keep it as broad as you can. It's a burden for sites if you put too many of these in. And finally, minimize study burden. We all love data. You know, I'd love to have had 10 extra visits in the TAG study and collected loads of OCT data and this and that and the other. But ultimately, that would have made it a much more burdensome trial for patients, and it would have made it a much more burdensome trial for centers. And that would have reduced our recruitment and retention rate. So actually, all you need to do is the minimum to answer the question that you are asking. So we then got the money, I'm glad to say, and then became the post-funding situation. So, as I say, we had 27 sites. Now, why did we want 27 sites? That seems like an awful lot of sites. Well, even though advanced glaucoma is relatively common, the success rate from the literature in recruiting to medicine against surgical intervention trials is quite low. So we anticipated that we were going to have quite a poor recruitment rate in terms of inviting people to participate. So we needed to build that into our strategy. We also needed to recruit 450 patients, which is a lot of patients over a 3-year period. So we didn't want to overburden sites because that would put them off, but we also didn't want it to be out of control. And actually, we only started off with 24 sites, and what we found was that recruitment wasn't quite as good as we thought it was going to be after about a year, so we invited some other sites to participate, and they were happy to do so. Within HTA grants, they include a feasibility phase, so you have to demonstrate successful recruitment in order for you to continue to be funded. So the pressure is very much on upfront to ensure that you can achieve that. And these are the 27 centers which I will be eternally grateful to for recruiting for TAGS. And you know, we were amazingly successful. We recruited to time, and actually we over-recruited, and we recruited to time and to target. That's extremely rare in a clinical trial. So I think what I'm trying to say is that what we did up front really informed our study design and our expectations. We weren't unreasonable in what we expected, even though that wasn't always what we wanted. And that paid dividends in terms of our recruitment. We didn't put too much pressure on the centres. We didn't have unrealistic expectations about how many patients would be willing to participate. And we responded when we thought things weren't quite going according to plan, made some minor adjustments, and that resulted in successful recruitment to time and to target. So as I mentioned briefly, TAGS was a randomized controlled trial. It was pragmatic in the sense that we only had one trial intervention, and that was the initial intervention. It was either surgery or medicine, and then everything after that was clinician-led. It was essentially what the doctor thought was the best treatment for their patients, and then we periodically followed patients accordingly. So, sorry, have I gone the wrong way? So after 2 years, as expected, even though the pressures were lower in the surgical group, there was no difference in our primary outcome, and there was no difference in visual fields. So it was very easy to go back to the HTA and say, look, we told you there wasn't going to be any difference after 2 years. Why don't you give us some more money? And they said yes. And then after 5 years, we found what we were expecting. Again, no difference between the primary outcome between the VFQ or the pressures remain different between the two groups, but now we're seeing a signal in terms of visual field progression in the medicine group, but not in the surgery group. So it was exactly what we were expecting, but of course this is the evidence base to support those assumptions. We went back to the HTA at this stage and they said, you know, this would be much more interesting if we could put it in the context of life-term outcomes. So we want to get another 5 years of funding from you, and they said, that sounds like a great idea. Let's give it to you. So we basically had a stepwise approach to managing our study. So the great thing about good studies is you get lots of publications out of them, and that is very satisfying for you and all the people who collaborated with you, and that to some extent is also part of the reward for these people who participated in the study. You also get mentioned as a landmark glaucoma trial in things like the European Glaucoma Society, so that's also very satisfying, and this means that this will change practice. When you start to get trials that are producing results which are recognized as landmark trials, that becomes important for everybody. And of course that's the most satisfying thing as a researcher, that you have achieved that and you will change practice subsequently. So TAGS has already been incorporated into the glaucoma guidelines of the European Glaucoma Society. There haven't been any new glaucoma guidelines for NICE or for the American Academy, so hopefully they will be incorporated into that. So back to my pathway, so that's 12 years of my life gone in reporting this back to you. Actually, it's another 5 years now because we got 5-year outcomes, and it's another few years after that to get the 10-year outcomes. So we're now talking 20 years of my life to produce one randomized controlled trial. But it's not over. We have an amazingly valuable data set. This valuable data set is now going to be used for other multiple collaborations with other randomized controlled trials, so that we have a spectrum of glaucoma that we can analyze and do all sorts of really fascinating things with. So I think at the end of the day, the thing that you need more than anything else is resilience, because we got knocked back a lot. We didn't get funding the first time that we submitted our application. So then we had to go back and think about it again and take the reviewers' comments, which are often quite nebulous and vague, into consideration and try and design something which we thought might be more successful the next time. You need a great CTU because they really are the people who have the expertise. We as clinicians think we know it, but actually they're the people who really know it, but they can help you and they want to help you to deliver a good trial. You need good clinical collaborators who will ground you and tell you what's reasonable and what you really need to know from this. You need to be very clear about what the most important outcomes are. We were lucky insofar as our sample size allowed us to address all outcomes that we wanted to, but you also need to think about the endpoints. In the context of glaucoma, you need long-term studies to really answer your question. It's not like medical retina, where if the vision improves immediately, then you have an outcome. It doesn't happen in glaucoma. You need good colleague engagement, and when I did that survey, I I spent about 2 years going to all the meetings and talking to all my colleagues in England and asking them if they would be willing to collaborate. So we have a great community there, which allowed me to be successful in recruiting. We need patient support and engagement, and you need to be very careful about the centres that you choose. You want ones with track record, but you also want ones, ideally, if they're your friends, they're always going to work harder for you. So use that relationship to the best of your ability. So we recruit to time and target, we better IOP with surgery, fewer drops with surgery, less visual field progression with surgery. The issue about safety proved to be unfounded. There were no episodes of wipeout in this group of patients, and in total we had about 270 trabeculectomies on patients with advanced glaucoma. So this is the largest prospective study looking at the potential for wipeout, and we didn't find any. It also happened that surgery was more cost effective over a patient's lifetime. So thank you very much for that. I'm very happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Keek. So we'll open the floor for questions. I think Randy has a question.
Yeah. First of all, congratulations on your resilience and persevering with this. It's truly a landmark trial, and I think that's great. My question relates to money, okay? So obviously a large clinical trial costs money, but there's different pools that you can pull off of. So in this case, I assume that the trabeculectomies were covered by the NIH or by the National Health just as a part of routine care. So there wasn't a cost bucket for that because that was taken care of.
Totally.
So there's some costs that may be related to the research resources that are required for this. But then there's your cost in the center putting all this together. So for the 2 years, what was the total cost for that? And then also for the 5 years,
okay,
what's
so
the total cost?
For the 2 years up to, for the first part of the study, it was £1.7 million. That was the cost. And then for the second part, it was about another £300,000 up to 5 years, and then about another £400,000 up to 10 years. So we've got funding for each of those stages. And within that funding envelope, they do cover the time of the investigator. So for example, about 15% of my time as a consultant was within that grant. Yeah.
I think that's excellent because, you know, and you saved so much money. Right now, if you want to do a drug, like just GMP testing is about $300,000, $500,000, you know, so that's just to make sure you can put it into a human. So obviously you don't have to do that with a surgical trial, but I think it's that pre-planning that you set yourself up for success over long years, because we don't have too many of these long-term studies. They teach us a lot about, you know, what actually happens to these patients, and glaucoma, like you said, it's not 1 year outcomes are not going to do it, so no, great work at it.
Yeah, indeed a really landmark study, and congratulate you for your resilience. My question was, how did you interact with the CTU unit in Belfast? What were the logistics, and how did that all happen?
Okay, so the first time I put in the application, I used my own local unit in Nottingham, and the feedback that we got from the HTA, who is the body that we applied to, was that there were some gaps in perhaps the application. And when you looked at it carefully, there were gaps really related to the clinical trials unit. So we sort of then looked around and approached Aberdeen, because they have a specific track record in doing glaucoma trials. So they did the Eagle trial, for example. So we spoke to them, and actually some of my co-investigators, Augusto, for example, was in Aberdeen at the time. And we had a meeting with them, and they looked at our application and what we proposed to change, and they thought, yeah, this is completely feasible. And the reason that that's important is because these guys have a track record of multiple applications. They also sit on the boards, the funding boards, so they know what the boards are expecting when you submit an application. So we had a health economist who sits on the board, a statistician who sits on the board, a methodologist who sits on the board. So automatically you're sort of getting feedback from the other side of the fence to help you with your application. So if you can get that, and that's why I say get a clinical trials unit with expertise, that really informs how you should submit your application for funding. So it was, they choose you, you don't choose them. That's the way it works.
Thank you, Dr. Anthony, for this presentation and for your presence here. I have a question about the pre-funding stage. Can you elaborate more on what makes a question important to the NHS and the funding bodies?
So you have to convince them. So there are several ways of approaching it. So as I said there, you need to convince them that there is a need to treat this group of patients better. So you need to convince them that it's a significant burden on the NHS, so enough patients to justify it. You have to demonstrate that the outcomes for this group of patients probably could be better. And if you can, you need to convince them that actually by improving our treatments and our outcomes, that will be cost effective for the NHS. So if you can tick all of those 3 boxes, you're halfway there. But on top of that, if you can find evidence to support this being a research priority, so I mentioned the James Lind Alliance, which mentions research priorities as part of their remit, and Cochrane reviews, then that gives even bigger strength to your research going forward. So what you're saying is there's a need, and also it's not just us that thinks there a need, it's these other independent bodies also think that there's a need. So that brings a lot of strength into your application at that pre-funding, pre-application level. Yeah.
And I think the recruitment you showed was pretty amazing, to be honest. I've never seen that for any trial. So I just wondered, what were the alerts and the mechanisms that you had in place to keep the recruitment on track?
So I think we anticipated that recruitment wouldn't be great for this trial. So we actually had a 3-year recruitment period because even though it's a fairly common condition with newly diagnosed glaucomas, in my unit I did an audit for a year and I found that we had about 50 patients who fell into the criteria for the study. So I thought, okay, so we're a very big unit. Compared to many of the other units that we're recruiting. So I assumed that it would probably be half, maybe a quarter of the number in some of those units that we were anticipating inviting. So we needed to sort of aim it at the right level that would not scare these units off. So that's the first thing. Secondly, we are anticipating, because historically there is a very poor recruitment to surgery against medicine. You ask a patient, okay, I'd like to do this study. One part which you have no control of, you're going to be randomized to an operation which can cause you to go blind, or you can just have some drops. Well, patients, generally speaking, are always going to go for the drops there. So we had a low expectation for the number of those eligible patients that we would recruit. And then we monitored the sites very carefully. So we had a sort of an expectation of what the recruitment rates would be like in those trials. In those different sites, and if they were falling behind, we did all the things that Monisha. I'd give them a call, I'd email them, I'd have a chat with them. The clinical trials unit would be speaking to their research setup to see what the barriers were to them recruiting. And in some places, it just whatever we did, and it was through no fault often of their own, they just weren't seeing the patients or they weren't identifying them. So when it got to the stage where we thought, okay, we might just be falling a bit behind here. There were other sites that had approached us to participate, a bit like somebody asked earlier about how do you, I think it was you actually, how do you get involved in a trial that's already ongoing? So I would approach them and say, we'd like to participate. Normally they've identified their trial sites up front before they even undertake the trial, but sometimes they need additional study sites to participate. So if you are on the short list of those, it helps. So then we approached these and they agreed to recruit. And as it happened, we actually did fine at the end of the day. It was a false alarm, but you feel that you have to do something to try and make it work.
So realistic expectations at the beginning and frequent monitoring sounds like...
I would say you need to be a pessimist in terms of your recruitment. If you're a pessimist, you would probably overcompensate. But for us, it didn't affect our ability to present the trial as viable.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Professor King.
Pleasure.
That was a great talk, and thank you very much for your...
So it gives me great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Adey Mohammed AlOwaifeer, and he is a talented ophthalmologist and glaucoma consultant, associate professor, and a champion in innovations, and he's the head of the innovation office in KKH and Research Center. He's the chair of the National Diabetic Retinopathy Screening Program using artificial intelligence, and his research interests include glaucoma and digital eye health. So, word to Dr. Adey, and thank you for coming.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khabir, for the nice introduction. And I'd like to thank Dr. Malik for inviting me to speak. I'll probably start with the conclusion. I've always thought, on my perspective of doing clinical trials in this part of the world, I've always thought that the highest calling of mankind in clinical medicine is doing clinical trials. But my mindset has shifted over time into don't do clinical trials unless there's something you need to achieve through the clinical trial, not for the purpose of doing the clinical trial itself. So I've been privileged in being part of 2 clinical trials that were run over the past few years over here at KKH, and I'd like to talk to you about our experience through those clinical trials. And just to put things into perspective, I'll just mention briefly what the 2 clinical trials are. So the first one was called the FIFA clinical trial, which is phaco versus phaco ECP in patients with primary angle closure, and my co-PI, Dr. Ibrahim Almeida. And the second one had a specific purpose to develop a local algorithm to screen diabetic patients for diabetic retinopathy from photograph. And my co-PI was Dr. Abdurrahman Badawi, and this translated into which is proudly the first product that comes out of KKH and is currently commercialized in the Saudi market, which is called Ainai. So when I emailed my colleagues and asked them about what you want me to discuss as key and lessons learned, I got lots of messages, and I tried to wrap them up within lessons learned. And just to give you a sense of flow and logic, I divided them into lessons before, lessons during, and then lessons after the clinical trial. So it's going to be 11 lessons, and don't ask me why I chose the number 11. 10 was too boring and 12 was long, so 11 is oddly perfect. So let's start with before the clinical trial. When we did the FIFA clinical trial, our thought was, we have a bunch of glaucoma patients here at KKH, and it wouldn't be difficult for us to recruit patients for that clinical trial. But it turned out that when we designed the clinical trial, and given that we were afraid during the medication washout period, patients will have spikes of high IOP, we excluded advanced glaucoma patients, and the trial was limited to mild and moderate angle closure glaucoma patients. And when we started recruiting, and this is something we had known before, but wasn't in perspective when we written down the protocol, is that 70% of patients at KKH were advanced or severe glaucoma patients. And another aspect that we did not consider is that a lot of patients here at KKH travel for their appointments through government subsidized tickets. So if you want to bring him in for a follow-up visit for the sake of the clinical trial, it would be very difficult to justify. And same story happened with Ainai when we did AI for diabetic retinopathy screening. The first location we targeted was diabetic centers. And then it turned out that diabetic centers are the centers within the MOH where uncontrolled diabetic patients go. And the PDR rate was 30%, and there was no patients with no diabetic retinopathy. So we could not prove the efficiency of our algorithm in detecting no disease. So that's why we shifted locations into primary healthcare clinics. So although this may seem simple and straightforward, but in hindsight, we missed those issues. So when you design the clinical trial, real-world feasibility, especially your target population, is very important. And the second thing, I've always wanted to do clinical trial to come up with fancy acronyms and names for those clinical trials. And the first thing that I thought about when we were designing the FIFA trial is what's going to be the acronym. It turns out that acronyms are very useful, not just for naming purposes, but for practicality. And even glaucoma co-investigators, when they were recruiting for the FIFA clinical trial, they would remember from the acronym that PHE is phaco ECP, and then PHA is phaco alone. Ainai was a different story. We were preemptively planning to commercialize the product. So we had a specific marketing team that chose a name that would be both in Arabic and English and incorporate AI technology and the I. So for those of you that don't speak Arabic, Ain, which is I, and then N is I in Arabic, and then AI is, of course, artificial intelligence. So the conjoint name was a beautiful brand name. We have now patients coming to primary care asking about AI technology. They want to get examined by that technology just because of the brand name, not because of how powerful or how sensitive our algorithm is. So lesson number 2 is a clinical trial name is not just an acronym. It creates impact and reinforces the purpose of the clinical trial itself. Last thing, I'd like to briefly talk about, again, before the clinical trial, the Saudi FDA. I've heard a lot of colleagues from different parts of the world struggle with regulators. We have a very supportive FDA, and I've talked to people at the Saudi FDA. I told them, you guys are not regulators, you guys are enablers, because they're very kind, they're very supportive. You can meet with them whenever you want. And if you go to the website, you'll find all the information that you may need to design your clinical trial. For instance, in our case, software as a medical device has clear PDF files for regulations in the Saudi market. And they have flow charts and timelines to respond. So if you send a question to them, they have to respond to you within a week or 10 days. Sometimes they respond at a pace that's even faster than our response to them. So lessons learned is, as soon as you have an initial draft, doesn't have to be a finalized proposal, go request a meeting with the FDA, and this is what we did. And we had a physical meeting, met with them in the office, and they walked us through some of the bits and pieces of how to structure the protocol, keeping in mind the medical device marketing authorization at the end when we finish. And they are actually actively engaging with us throughout the process. And even if you have someone within your institute, in our case, we had a manufacturer, which was the Saudi Data and AI Authority. We had a dedicated person to engage with the FDA regarding AI. A clinician needs to be in the loop to understand the technical jargon and the regulatory jargon related to the product, because whenever they face a hurdle, they'll eventually have to go back to you for reference. And then you get what's called a no objection letter to kick off your clinical trial and then start activities. Of course, this pertains to AINI, not FIFA, which is an investigator-initiated trial. So the third lesson number 3 is initiate communication with the Saudi FDA at inception. This can save you a lot of time and effort and potentially reduce friction later on down the line. Now I'll move on to during the clinical trial, and a lot of the things that I've talked about have been maybe addressed yesterday and in some of the talks earlier today. But again, I'll touch on some of the issues related to a recruitment within FIFA, within KKESH. So when we started recruiting for FIFA, we thought, okay, patients are scheduled within the OR for phaco, and they have angle closure. Let's go talk to them on the day of surgery. And patients, when they're already scheduled for a procedure and things have already been set and consent has already been signed, they're not psychologically ready to discuss a change in plan on the morning of surgery. So we said, let's move a step back and then go to patients within the pre-hospitalization unit. And again, if a patient has already left the physician's office and they went to a pre-hospitalization unit, they've already discussed the surgical plan and they're also reluctant to renegotiate it again. So what we've found out the most effective way is to screen the clinic, patient chart even before the patient presents to the ophthalmologist, and only then inform the ophthalmologist on the morning before surgery that you'll have 2 patients showing up today in your clinic. Those are potential FIFA candidates. And of course, some digital tools that you can use to improve recruitment. We have infographics that are distributed throughout clinics. We have a video that we send out by email and WhatsApp to all newly coming residents and fellows to the glaucoma divisions every month, and then periodic reports of recruitment that are sent to collaborating investigators. So recruitment is a true bottleneck, and you need to do every effort to make sure that your recruitment pipeline is full and be ready to revise and adjust once, twice, and even 3 times. I want to talk about the perspective of our patients here at KKESH. Generally speaking, and I didn't know that until we started FIFA, I thought patients would be reluctant to participate in clinical trials, but they generally have a spirit of mutual cooperation, especially, in the sense of the teachings of our Islamic religion, that you're going to help others with your participation in this clinical trial. So most patients are, if they understand very well what's going to happen throughout the clinical trial, they are willing to participate. CRCs went through a lot in adjusting communication. For those of you that speak Arabic, the actual translation of clinical trial is tajruba saririya, and this is not a friendly word because it reflects, a hint to a patient that I'm going to try something on you. So we, tweaked the translation into dirasa or bahth, which is more plausible from a patient perspective. So number 5, engage patients by emphasizing their trial benefits, and then encourage a spirit of contribution and careful communication with your patients. Another thing that we had not planned before the clinical trial, and we fell short into later, is the patient journey. So as Professor King was talking about earlier, balancing the desired outcome measures of the clinical trial versus the burden that will be incurred to the institute and patients. When we were thinking about phaco with ACP, we said, okay, we want to look at extent of angle widening with anti-segment OCT. We wanted to look at extent of flaremetry and the inflammation that happens post-op and so forth. And we chose the whole checklist of glaucoma tests and investigations within the protocol. But what happened is that patient, when he comes morning of the OPD visit, at the time of recruitment, he will move to 6 different locations all around the hospital, which was difficult. That's why we modified the protocol and we eliminated some of the tests. Some methods that may help, drawing the patient's journey, and this is what we do in Ainai. We actually count the number of steps that patients take from door to reception to AI screening station unit and then back home. Or you can do a workflow sheet. And one of the useful things is that you try being a patient yourself one day and pretend you're going to be recruited for this clinical trial and see how you're going to mobilize within the hospital to just understand the patient's perspective or the perspective of the patient's journey. So design the trial with patient journey in mind and balance necessary steps with the patient experience. I'll move on to talking about the study team. At the beginning, we thought, okay, the study team is the investigators, the clinical research coordinator, and the research unit, and that's it. So let's hit the ground running. But when we started sending patients to do ancillary tests, ancillary staff were not aware about the clinical trial to begin with, and they were willing to accommodate patients. However, they were confused whether to prioritize, research patients versus regular patients, and they were willing to help if they were notified ahead of time, just to manage their expectations of workload. And we worked closely with the Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Saleh, to arrange and accommodate research patients and reaching a balance between research and usual clinical care. And after coordinating with diagnostic teams and then scheduling clinical trial patients during lighter days, things were nice and smooth. So the lesson number 7 is clinical trial team is not just the actual clinical trial staff, it's any personnel that's going to face the patient throughout his journey. Number 8, which is closest to my heart, this was supposed to be number 1 maybe, which is you need to digitalize and not digitize. And the difference between the two terms is digitize means paper transforms to PDF, and that's it, no matter how much time and cost you have saved in the process. Sometimes doing something digital takes longer time or costs more. Digitalization is imagining the process and then automating the workflow within the system. And although some electronic health record systems are difficult to deal with when you're conducting a clinical trial, and TrackCare InterSystem is not a true EDC system, but it's versatile. You can change a lot of things to comply with what you want to do within the clinical trial. However, you need to engage with the HIS team ahead of time to plan things accordingly. So a couple of examples, templates that can you use, and you can restrict the investigators to using the templates only during clinical trial visits. Order sets, so an investigator forgets what is the medication regimen for that patient that's going to be included in the clinical trial. We have designated buttons you can click FIFA post-op and then all the post-op medications are there. And we have clinical decision support within track care, but these needs to be structured before the clinical trial itself. So soft stops and hard stops, the system will not allow you to move on from one page to another if you hit a limit that's against the clinical trial protocol. And another story from Ainai, which is digitizing the consent. We're lucky in Saudi Arabia, we have a digitized government. You can access your government ID digitally on Tawakkalna. You can access your bank account, which is way more important than anything else that you would consent to within a clinical trial. Yet when you're signing a clinical trial, it's paper. And when we did 15,000 patients in Ainai, it becomes very difficult, moving paper around Riyadh and bringing it back to KK. So when I talked to an engineer solved this problem, not me, who's doing business analysis at Ainai. He told me, "Why are you doing this?" I told him, "I don't know. Ever since I started doing research, this is how we do it." And he told me, "Let's reimagine the workflow and let's do OTP through NAFAD, you all know NAFAD system. And we have identity access management in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, so you can identify yourself digitally through a NAFAD application, which is government owned. And then the patient would receive an OTP and confirm the consent. We ran that by the FDA, IRB, all approved that the consent is digitized, and this is now what's currently being underwent. So digital technology improves efficiency, and investing effort upfront to implement those tools pays off in a very streamlined process afterwards. I'll talk about three things after the clinical trial. Audit can happen or usually happens during the clinical trial, but I'll just talk to you about our experience with the Saudi FDA. They usually give you an unscheduled audit visit, and they'll tell you we'll visit you within a week or two. And they usually are interested in reviewing the documents related to the clinical trial. And they look at all types of documents, even meeting minutes for the safety and data monitoring committee meetings of the clinical trial. And they usually emphasize during the visit on patient safety, whether the consent is signed, things along those lines. And the perfectionist nature in me, when they came to us during the first visit, I told them everything is fine, we don't have any violations and we don't have any adverse events. And that's just too good to be true, because human nature, if you are doing work, you have to do mistakes. If you're not doing mistakes, this means that you're not working. So we had to educate our clinical sites that any adverse event or any protocol violation should be recorded. One of them was that consent forms in a couple of patients were not signed. Patients left home, so we called the patients back and had them sign the consent. We reported that incident as a protocol or as an adverse event, sorry. Time is up, Dr. Khabir? Yeah. 20 minutes? You have 2 minutes. Okay, I was going to talk about automating documentation, but I'll skip that. I'll just sum up with why would I be interested myself after going through this experience in doing a following clinical trial. Now after implementing Ainai, we have 80% of diabetic patients going through the system are filtered by AI, not needing to see an ophthalmologist, and we have user manuals that are going to spread all across the kingdom. So this is the impact that would justify me going through the hassles of a clinical trial. And then, of course, we have set an example of how we can conduct investigator-initiated clinical trials and locally developed clinical trials that will translate into true patient impact in the region. And we have now some government agency talking to us, asking us to take their money and do other related projects. So if you start demonstrating operational excellence, just like Dr. Craven mentioned, money will follow. So that's all, folks. I'd just like to wrap up with my true conclusion, which is KK truly represents a greenfield for clinical trials. We have patients, staff, equipment, technology, and data. Everything's in place. But what remains is that the investigator takes the initiative and persists through the journey for a particular cause that you would believe in. I'd like to acknowledge the FIFA teams and the Ainai team. And I'd like to particularly acknowledge my 2 co-PIs and friends, Dr. Ibrahim Almeida and Dr. Abdurrahman Badawi, who are not just colleagues, they are true friends that I've enjoyed the joys of life with, whether it's the hills of the Death Valley Mountain in Bolivia or the alleys of the Holy Mosque in Al-Madinah. And I'd like to thank you all for coming here, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Ade, for the excellent presentation. And if there are any questions, we can have it at the end. Just we will take one question or two. We can just brief questions for Dr. Ade.
Thanks, Adi. Great talk as always. You mentioned that earlier in the I&I trial, you had to make a decision about switching sites because you weren't finding the patients that were met the inclusion criteria. How easy was it to make that decision, and how did you find the new sites?
Luckily, primary healthcare centers within the kingdom are abundant. We have 2,000 primary healthcare centers and only 20 diabetic centers. So actually it was easy getting out of diabetic centers. It was difficult getting in the first place. And the other thing is that when we chose diabetic centers, we did not know a fact that there's an ophthalmologist that usually visits those diabetic centers. So given the high risk and that specific patient population, they did not need our intended intervention, which was screening using AI. So this all goes back to assessing feasibility before even starting to save the 3 or 6 months maybe that we went through relocating.
Dr. Ade, I have one question. How did you ensure that you have a very good follow-up? And what did you do? And how long was that?
You mean follow-up
for FIFA, for this trial?
Okay, maybe Munira can answer that question.
Okay.
So basically,
communication.
Yes, Munira and Muna have done a great job, who are our research coordinators.
Okay, excellent.
They were, it was human, to answer the question, it was a human effort. They were actively tracking patients.
Okay, and just I have one request from you, because you have done this. This is one of the first trials. The lessons you learned, if we can have that in a document, it will really help us, especially like one thing was the consent form, how to digitalize it rather than digitize it, so that we can take that lesson we can implement in the National Eye Survey, which we are about to start. So if there are no further questions, we can, yeah.
Very nice talk, but I think that the thing that you do here, you have to have a country that allows to do here. For instance, in the clinical trials in Spain, it's mandatory for the patients to write with their own hand about the design, the informed consent here. All the consent has to be in paper because the laws requires for that one. So if you have a country that allows you to do these things, that is much better to whether to digital. But most of the compliance for regulatory is even not in Spain, only in Europe, because they see the same lines around all the European agents here, regard for the patient to sign by their own hand the paper here. Otherwise, the consent there is a non-valid consent.
Yeah, so things are different in different countries. Here we have the National Data Management Office, and they oversee all regulations related to privacy, data sharing, and individual rights, citizen rights, let's call it, because it's not related to health data alone. And they have a huge regulation chapter related to healthcare data, and they've outlined the do's and don'ts within Saudi Arabia. Of course, things don't apply elsewhere in the world. So actually, part of your feasibility assessment of doing a clinical trial anywhere in the world is looking at what makes your job easier within the environment that you're working in, and then leveraging that.
So our next speaker is our colleague David Almeida. He's a board-certified ophthalmology vitreoretinal surgeon with extensive academic, clinical, and research credentials. He holds a degree in the University of Toronto, University of Seagate, and did get the PhD there. The University of George Washington University, he conducted an MBA there. And in the Queen's University, did medical school and residency there. He's completed a fellowship in vitreoretinal diseases in Iowa here. Now he's practicing in Pennsylvania. Now I'm right. And he leads also the AD retinal research, focusing in surgical and pharmaceutical ophthalmic research. And his research focus is on complex surgical techniques and special retinal conditions. And he has authored more than 120 papers, peer-reviewed papers. He received multiple awards for the American Society of Retinal Surgeons and American Academy. So he's going to talk about new clinical trials. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much again for the invite. It's wonderful. My first time to Saudi Arabia, first time to Riyadh, and it's been great to meet so many smart team members, investigators, and I'm gonna kind of show you, I think, what some of the potential routes that you can kind of, I think, circumvent and also allow to grow in a way that supports your community. Okay, we're in business. So, how do you design the ophthalmology clinical trials of the future when you're trying to kind of try, I think, do two things? I think, Randy, how you put it was excellent and really important. Probably two streams. You know, what was existing as investigator, kind of homegrown stuff, and then like pharma operational excellence, which that always kind of helps the other part too. So these are my disclosures. I've worked with many companies in many countries, and so this talk has another name. It's called a collection of experiments and experiences. So to date, Marcos has some old data. I've published over 300 peer-reviewed publications. Speaking a lot and been involved in a lot of trials, including N-of-1 trials the last few years. Once a year, somebody shows up and says, I have this thing that I want you to put in my eye. And they usually have lots of money. And I usually tell them, if I do that with just my degree, I go to jail. But if we do it as a trial, then we all benefit. So I do N-of-1 trials very commonly for different reasons. And it's a fun way to, so we're in Erie, Pennsylvania. So Erie, Pennsylvania, this is our core mission statement. I think this applies to every site at every place always. I'll say this again. I think this applies for every site at every place always. So maximizing community to foster research, participant access, and diversity. If you put your strategic drivers, 1, 2, 3, call them community, call them access, call them diversity, even when you don't get your objective, you've still moved your program forward. Because I think these are the things that are always really relevant. So this is our, I started Erie Retina Research in 2021. We had 3 trials and I think 200,000 in revenue the first year. And then in 2024, we had over 10 million in yearly revenue and we had over 55 trials. So in January 1st, 24, I switched over to Krakow. It's called clinical research as an alternative care option. I see patients for free. I don't take any insurance, and I put them into clinical trials. If they don't get into clinical trials, we still take care of them with our own mechanisms. So today, we're the only practice in USA that does that, because you can verify with NPIs, but I'm pretty sure no one else is doing that globally either. These are old numbers, but now we have regularly over 1,000 patients per year in clinical trials. So how do we do this, right? So WCG is a big body organization that gave us an award in 2024 for innovation in clinical trials. What we did is we said, look, we believe that if you have operational excellence, this thing Randy says, I can deliver any trial, anywhere, to any patient. So we said, let's do this. Let's show them. For a year, we said, we're going to go do gene therapy, and we're going to go in our area along Lake Erie, and we're going to go look for they try to get at least 50% in persistent poverty. So we went out, we screened 113 patients for gene therapy. You can see almost hit our target there. In 1 year, covering those 130 miles, I performed 30 subretinal surgeries for wet AMD and DME, and these patients, and over 50% of them were in persistent poverty. So, what WCG gave us the award, and what I said when I accepted is this is a proof of concept only in the way that we bias as physicians all the time saying that patient's too sick, that patient's not sick enough, and if we go to the evidence and we actually kind of try to deliver, you see that you can actually achieve it. So thinking in a different way is really important in clinical trials. And so how you organize yourself. So I interact, risk management team, our translational research, every part of it. And I think as a clinical trials unit, you have to set yourself up similar to that with some way to track everything. And this really turns into evidence generation, because once you start doing that, then you can actually say, okay, you have to do your operational excellence. That's the blue thing. The data you're going to use, but then you can actually do discovery too. So these are kind of the 3 pillars we use, and these are all the companies that we've created that I've started because of this.
A local research clinic cuts the ribbon on a new facility today, offering a unique service to the Erie community. Tyler Gallagher spoke with the doctor running the facility. He joins us in the studio with more tonight. Tyler.
Thank you, Jen. Erie Retina Research used to reside on State Street, but now the ophthalmology team is moving out to West 8th Street. Getting an appointment with an ophthalmologist can be time-consuming and expensive, but one local research clinic is offering appointments free of charge to anyone looking to check up on their eyes. On Monday, Dr. David Almeida cut the ribbon on a new location for Erie Retina Research, allowing the clinic to now perform surgeries at the facility on West 8th Street in addition to the imaging and clinical trials done there.
We're the only ophthalmology practice in the United States doing Krakow, which is called clinical research as an alternative care option, which goes back to this idea. If you have a vision problem, come in. It's free. You get access, and you guys will see it here too. The most advanced imaging equipment that we use for clinical trials in the world.
Almeida says many ophthalmology patients had to drive to Cleveland or Pittsburgh to get access to advanced treatment or clinical trials, but now all of that can be found here in Erie. He says anyone of any age can come to the clinic with any eye problem and no insurance is needed. So I just got an OCT scan of my eye here. You can see it up on the screen there, and I'm told I have a young and healthy eye, thankfully. But if you're getting older in age and you've had a history of issues in your family, you can come here and get the same scan completely free of charge.
We don't charge for that because it's, I think, more important to diagnose, know what we have, and then we can deal with it after. It took about 17 years to get to this point, to build enough like a pedigree and reputation with all our sponsors and partners to say, look, what we do is really special and better than almost anyone else, and so now we have good funding to that end, which is great.
And if you can't make it to the Retina Research Facility, the student-run mobile retina clinic goes across town to bring free eye screening to people looking to check their eyes.
A lot of people don't care about the retina. People just say, oh, I can't see well, no, I need new prescriptions. They don't realize that a lot of it comes down to, a lot of it's the back of the eye as well. And you can only do so much with reading glasses until the point where you need surgeries.
Photos are taken via a special phone camera and are then sent back to Dr. Almeida for a further look. And if you have a history of family...
So you see we're different, right? Like if you can operationalize yourself in a way, you can then, I think, see more patients, because we know this is what we've been talking for 2 days. Trials used to be this old way. Marcos and I were talking about this. Like, so there's no utility to think of doing trials like the old way, because now there's modern applications to it. So how do you get rid of these inefficiencies? One way we've done it is basically you streamline, you eliminate everything that you don't need. You be very militant about that. You be very aggressive about that, and you put your strategic driver with the one that pharma. Accelerating pharma innovation. That's what pharma cares about. So if you can say that as a mission statement, then you know that time is your premium that you're going to really work hard at. So, and I would say that's not even enough. You need a flywheel. A flywheel is something that generates its own energy. If you move enough energy through these patients, through these clinics, like if you don't go, the clinics are going to call you, say, how come you guys are not coming to screen here now? And you realize all we're doing is screening clinics there, right? That's all it is. But data, right? The difference is we take the data, we become meaningful with the data, and we can help those patients after. And the CASEX, the Centers for Advanced Surgical Exploration, which different centers, really was addressed as a variable, right? Like my idea was that, look, there's all this systemic friction in clinical trials. Let's go solve for them. Let's go solve for poor communication. Let's solve for enrollment delays. Let's solve for these are things that no one's really done much on. So, and we, I think, arrive at a new industry standard. We, from feasibility to screening, 20 days. CTA and budget's done in 5 days. We've had 35 major sponsor audits, no major findings. Never had as FDA audit. We're organized over continents. That makes sense for us to distribute our technology. So, and really pushing that idea of kind of discovery. So, Deepak asked the best question yesterday, I think, of the 2 days, which is like, how do you work? How are you going to do this, right? Like, and I was waiting for someone to say that, because that's what you need to know. So how do you work? All right, processing protocols. And this is me, this is 2 weeks ago in Montpellier, France, with the company's called AccuSurgical. That's Luca, their robot. You as the surgeon sit in another room. The surgery's done with somebody who operates the robot. Really cool, the best one I've seen, very interesting. So if you think of King Khalid Eye Specialist Hospital as a premier institution, then it's going to do two things. It's going to empower itself. It's going to empower the patients that come to it. So you're going to empower yourself by having these processes of excellence and being able to achieve things that you weren't able to do before. But then you actually empower patients by giving them access to treatments that don't yet exist. So how do you do that? Like, how do you do it in a meaningful way? So we've created lots of products because there were really vendors out there. So this is one of our first AI products called Study Coordinator AI, Sky. So imagine just me, I have 11 study coordinators that just see my trials. So like when I started training them, 1, 2, I was like, there's no way that I can keep continuous training at the level that we need with like this volume. Impossible. So we need a better way. So Sky is trained on the study material. So Roche Voyager has a Sky. For DMT, Spectre has a Sky. And then it's only trained on IB, ICF. So very straightforward. So all true. And now the study coordinator has that on a tab. And so instead of having to find the PI or something like that, that's fine too. But not for silly stuff. So this is an example. Simple question: what's the hemoglobin A1C as cut off for the study? Ask Squash tells you the answer. This is our demo. Is a pregnant test required at screening? Super simple question, right? The answer is always yes for any trial. But we use this as a very, very specific reason. Because what you can then prompt them to do is say, what type of pregnancy test? Is it a spot test? Or is it actually a serum? If you have a range, you have to repeat. So all these things that are so critical right before you even dose that patient that now you can get without going through which page was that on the protocol. This is the first patent I ever did in clinical research. It's called data uncoupling. So my PhD was in math, so I can usually make things sense of math and I can work with them. So this is a formulaic breakdown of how a study coordinator moves, kind of a mix of least steps, that you kind of use for AI, but also with oversight that reach. And so what you get is a model that decouples the study coordinator from all data input. So data is a separate business, seeing patients in a different business. And so this allows you to see more patients, and the study coordinator is much more engaged. Think of like the study coordinator, we created a new thing called knowledge translation, because the risks of you putting your data in EDC are very high for an audit and for a loss. But if you actually have knowledge translation to then take it from your e-source into your actual EDC, that's going to be better. So it's kind of like knowledge translation is a human API between these two systems. So, but what about the patient, right? The patient suffers from bad tech, bad forms, bad everything. So Sarah is another AI bot we created. It's a smart assistant for research activities. ePros, anything that's with the patient. If the patient wants to ask when's my next appointment, or a patient has a problem, it lives on their laptop or iPad. They can interact with it. It goes back to the site, goes back to the sponsor, and you have data that the FDA believes. And so this is what you get.
It's really a pleasure to bring you one of, when I think of
this patient had intravitreal gene therapy, Janssen's product for geographic atrophy. We randomly audit our trials to see, hey, how are you doing? Is this a good trial?
My privilege and my pleasure to we're trying to do with the clinical trials. So, in your opinion, how has it been like to be part of clinical trials? How do you see it? If you could just kind of...
It's probably been the best thing I've ever done. Watch out, I might get emotional. But when this all started, and my doctor in Meagle said the macular was worse, and then I come and you explained everything to me. It was like somebody hit me in the gut with a sledgehammer. And I have never been through anything that I've been more comfortable, felt more confident in yourself and all of your staff.
There's nothing more scary than to lose your vision, and so to say someone that while they're going about losing their vision, that this was the best experience in their life, I think this is what the clinical trials bring, because it's a much better experience, it's much better care. And so, okay, but now you actually have to deliver it, right? And there, you have to start at the beginning, like as been mentioned. Monisha did a wonderful job. Randy and Anthony, really, and with Adi as well, really showing that there's so many things that part of it, and starting it is important. So this is how a trial usually starts: 0, get some patients, move it along at something. But why do it like this? Why start like this, right? What if? So I said to my team one day, I said, look. Why do we start a trial at 0? Why not start at 5? Why not start at 12? Why not start at 100? Whatever it is, the trial. So we then sat down and worked out all the math. So it's called the block enrollment strategy. We published a paper on it. So the idea here is before the trial starts, you define that group. And you say, okay, I know exactly what they are. You bring them in. You know that, hey, these 15 people are match the criteria. I think 12 of them are going to go in. They get screened on all day Saturday or all day Sunday. But before the trial starts on Monday, this becomes a sentinel group for the trial. Sponsors... I used to have to convince sponsors about this and saying like do it like this. Now they ask on request. We get trials first because of it. Because why would you want to start a trial one here, one there, at different timelines? There's super complicated protocol. It's not good science to do it like that. You run the data set at once in real time. So this is the math behind it. It's basically hash functions, the way that how do you deal with a constrained resource. But it involves 3 steps. And the sponsor, I make it mandatory. I said you have to be at every one of these meetings. Where plan, we show them the database, qualify, we show them the pre-screening records, then we go do it. So like they see it that, hey, this is what we said we're going to do, we're going to do. And so you go from starting these kind of very slow, you're waiting for IRB stuff to start there, to starting enrollment at really high numbers. And now leading from the front is much more dangerous. I'll say that again. Leading from the front is more dangerous. You're going to find the laboratory manual error first. Your study coordinator is going to make some mistakes. You're going to do all those mistakes first. But if you have the mechanism to diagnose it and then say, hey, we made a mistake, I recommend you give this capital to all your other sites, then they feel, okay, now they're a part. That operation access becomes very, very clear. And here's the proof. So this is Oculus's DX221 Diamond study. This was a phase 3, 800 patients globally. It's a topical drop for DME. We are the top enrolling site of the whole world. You know, we screen 51, and all we do is blocks. Riyadh, who's the CEO of Oculus, would come say, David, I need another block. I said, whenever you need it, just tell me, you know, and we'll run another one. So we maximize enrollment. There's no wasting time, and it's very, very direct. So we have processes. But like, how do you actually like learn these processes? And we talked yesterday, there's Melvina from the FDA. I'm part of the School of Innovation at Stanford, and I teach one course, how do you fail? You know, very, very important. You have to know how to fail, because you have to, if you can catch your failure, you're so far ahead than everyone else, because now you're not gonna make that mistake again, or maybe you'll learn more. So going through device trials, see, like, Anthony did amazing work, 12 years. I'm nowhere near as patient as Anthony. I can't even wait 12 days, never mind 12 years. So in seeing some of the slowdowns with device trials, it said, we need something better. You know, device, I have to get these guys to learn this technique. And device trials pose a special challenge, and why we've seen such a decrease in the USA for them. In a drug asset, I'm gonna evaluate that asset. In a trial, I gotta evaluate the asset or the device, but also surgeon technique, right? And I need to de-risk that to 0. So I created the near real surgical specimens as kind of the best thing that we can have to train. So these are, they start their journey as a cadaver, then they're transformed into something that has no tissue fixative, no formaldehyde. You can do surgery on it like a real eye. It's the only thing that is that it's cold, because it's like fresh frozen. It lasts for up to 10 months in your fridge. And we teach around it. So I created this for clinical trials, so I can say, hey, we have suprachoroidal therapies. This is how we show suprachoroidal. But you know, it's also now taking on a much bigger role as a teaching and training. It's its own separate thing that you know, how we bring it to sites to help their learners, their residents, their fellows, whatever they're working on, they're to do better. So, you know, scleral fixation, such a pain. We could simulate many different cases with this in these situations, and you get, I think, much better surgeons. This is all IP that's protected, and you can see here, compared to what we normally have, you know, it's like what we have now lacks so many things that, you know, this is what example what you could do with the NRSS. There's a 3-camera system, 1 camera outside, 1 camera OCT, 1 camera from the inside, and you can now see it from the inside. So you can see this is Susvimo going in, and you can now see, hey, how big was that wound? Did you need a suture there? What was the force vectors in there? Were they all coming towards the center of the eye, or are they being displaced like asymmetrically? You can see things that you couldn't see before. And we published this paper just maybe a month ago, and this was, I think, important because we have 3 major gene therapies coming out that are going to be suprachoroidal. Regenx Bio's Avius for diabetic retinopathy, one-time cure for diabetes in your eye. We have Korea's suprachoroidal geographic atrophy, which is expected. So you have these major trials, but no one before this paper knew how to engage the suprachoroidal space in a meaningful way. So the issue is that the models we had before had a lot of variation. So we can see that we bring almost, you know, we reduce that variation multiple fold. And this is, so for the first time, this is what we saw. So I presented this at Macular Art in Paris this summer. So you're seeing the OCT here. So this is using the Everad's injector. You're seeing there's a needle engagement you're seeing at the top. And if you look down, you inject over, it's 100 microliters being injected over 10 seconds. You're going to see for the first time the choroidal space being created. Because remember, it's a potential space. It's not there. You have to force it open, and this is where all the complications come when you force it in there. So you're seeing that the suprachoroidal space actually engage here. You actually see acid, and there's the very first time. So now we can work with this with regulatory bodies and with other aspects and say, okay, this is a real therapy that we can verify where it needs to be. OCT, as we're training, this is done in our Miami site. So as we're training these, we now train PIs for the trial, working with the sponsor, so that we can, you know, properly de-risk them as much as we can. But you learn things too. So OCT is not something that you can have in any feasible way in a clinical trial, right? It's too expensive. But what you could do is you can do a scleral cut down. So right now for some of these trials, the PI comes to Miami, they do 2 eyes. One of the eyes has to hit. So we put a chromophore in there. If you cut down the sclera, if you hit the suprachoroidal space, what are you going to see first? Green. If you don't, you put it in the retina. And you can see here, and it's slow-mo for dramatics, you know, and you see the green come out, awesome. You know, you're certified, go do the trial. The idea here is that you can actually see and try that now before doing the trial. Imagine if you had this for the glaucoma surgery. You know, you could have a standardized surgical, and then usually I come around after and I say, oh yeah, you did, there's the retina, good job. So if you had that, you could have accelerated the trial, and I think done it much safer than before. So we're releasing this in a couple of weeks at AAO. This is called the Explorer Scope. This is the suprachoroidal space, you're in it now.
sclera above, choroid below. You go where the drug goes, or you go where the acid goes. You can travel any part of the globe, and you can go there. We're working with Alcon. They have a new vitrectomy machine. We can go there. We can now, if you just put some triamcinolone in some BSS, you can measure sphere of influence by just very simple watching, looking at how the fractal breaks up. So you can do very basic sphere of influence studies. So you can look, once again, see things that you couldn't see before. So all of our surgical training comes out of K6 Miami, and then I'm going to play this 30-second clip to sum up K6 Miami.
في KSX ميامي نقدم تدريبا متطورا لأطباء العيون وشركات الأدوية وشركات تصنيع الأجهزة الطبية. يتميز مختبرنا المتطور بالعينات الجراحية القريبة من الواقع NRSS الفريدة، والتي تم الحفاظ عليها باستخدام طريقتنا الخاصة للحصول على واقعية لا مثيل لها للعينات الجراحية التفاعلية بيولوجيا. نحن نقدم استخداما مختبريا قابلا للتخصيص وترتيبات حصرية للفعاليات ومحاضرات من كبار أطباء العيون العالميين، مع إدارة جميع الخدمات اللوجستية بواسطة فريق الخبراء لدينا. يقع بالقرب من مطار ميامي الدولي، ونحن نضمن لك تجربة تدريب سلسة هي الأفضل في فئتها ومصممة للارتقاء بمهاراتك ومعرفتك إلى آفاق جديدة.
How's my Arabic? So that's our AI. I wish I could speak Arabic like that. So a couple of years ago, I realized that I talk really fast, and then if somebody doesn't speak English, it makes it really hard. So now I try to communicate when I can with, if there's colleagues in different, just put it through we have an AI bot for different languages, and we use that which summarizes papers and presentations. So, which brings us to this: how do you communicate? I still, anywhere I'm invited to go teach, I go. It could be an elementary school, it could be, something as fancy as K-Cash, but because I think it's when you learn, clinical trials teaches you that you're always asking questions, and like that old saying, the people that have found the truth, stay away from them, keep me in the company that are people that are looking for the truth. So that's clinical trials. This is a way we communicate. If you sign an agreement with us, if you're like a local practice, you get this little app. This app allows you, if you're in another office and you have a DME patient, you could book that DME patient right into our office. You don't have to call us, you don't have to anything, so it goes right in there. So you try to remove every barrier for that patient. Remember access. Access is one of our access. Anything that limits access, eliminate, because that is going to be ultimately where they go in clinical trials. So very simple program, very, very popular. I spend a lot of time in airports and airplanes. And this is our K6 Miami. I drag my kids whenever I can.
Pass it off at this point.
Yeah, this is for me the time that I need to go to a meeting.
and this is Nat Lowenstein, who's a big KOL. She's trying the NRSS. I invite KOLs down to Miami to try. This is kind of we have one of these once a quarter K6 conference. It's called. Usually we pick a topic and we discuss it, and we'll bring KOLs from around the world.
Amazing.
And they're always blown away.
GFC. So it goes and all.
Erie International Airport is teaming up with Erie Retina Research to increase vision awareness for travelers while they wait. Nicole Lee joins us now in the studio with much more about this health initiative. Nicole.
Sean, an interactive display in the terminal provides an easy way to check for symptoms of serious vision conditions. Better yet, those who suspect an issue can get a free screening and, if needed, treatment.
This is the first place where our patients from other states, from other countries, get to see Erie first. It's also where all our clients first come through all the time through here.
Now, after travelers come through security at Erie International Airport, they'll see this. It's a step-by-step guide to check for early signs of vision conditions.
The #1 cause of blindness in Erie County and the developed world is age-related macular degeneration.
It's the first
Nothing comes
global
close.
immersive
X marks the
airport
spot where
exhibit
travelers
that also
can
does tests, and you
cover
can book an
one
appointment.
eye
So
and look at the grid and the letters
teaches you
for
about
symptoms
metamorphopsia.
of vision loss. The board features contact information for Erie Retina Research, which provides free screenings and treatment.
We've in the past have done things with other organizations that are health related, and this is an opportunity to help people that might not know that there's challenges with their eyes, that there is an alternative and some solutions that's cost effective.
Dr. Almeida says many people don't seek treatment because they suspect vision loss is normal with age, and there's
And so the idea is there, if you have there, so it's a 4-step. The patient goes there, learns what they're doing, they step over the X, they get something. If it's all weird, they can say, hey, do you have metamorphopsia? And then they can actually book an appointment into the thing and we can see them, which is kind of fun. So we work with many, many partners, like I said, many, many companies that trust, that we believe that how we do it, our Operation X is really top notch, but it goes really back to that idea of patients, really like trying to help if you go back to the idea, what's your community? What diseases are relevant in your community? How can you get patients access? So how do you get the best clinical trials that match the disease in your patients? And how do you protect diversity? How do you still remember that, hey, we make better drugs when we know how everyone responds to it? So I think that's the most important. You guys are, I think, doing a wonderful job, and I'm excited to see how the future goes. Thank you again for the invite, and I appreciate the attention.
Thank you very much. Impressive. Any questions from the audience?
It's amazing to see what you do. How do you get all this time to do all these things with, and still get time to swim with dolphin?
A short sleeper, maybe. I don't know. I find this cliche and kind of corny, but you get to spend your days getting vision back. It's the most rewarding thing. I feel if I'm not doing this, I'm kind of wasting my time. I enjoy this better.
And you must be getting lots of patients because your service is free, right?
Correct.
And how do you manage influx of all these patients?
So I think you heard such an important question. And I think Monisha, Randy, and Anthony answered it in different ways too. If you can show operational excellence, you can show that the data that you have is super useful in whatever construct. That's the most valuable thing. Right, we know that. So pharma will buy that, and so these are all pre-specified contracts. Say, you need 100 patients of this disease, whatever, and we take 100% private pharma money, and then we take since the beginning of 24, we invest in all our own technologies within it. That shows some of the companies that we have and some of the things. So we put it back into it, and we try to see where it goes. But I think it's that operational excellence. If you show that, then I think that is needed. And there's less and less sites that can do it.
So your patients need to sign a special consent for your...
Three of them.
To use the data.
Yeah.
Thank you. Amazing work.
Oh, thank you.
Doctor, regarding the SKY, it's like a clinical coordinator, AI clinical coordinator. What are like some of the tasks that they can do the SKY?
Good question. So you can do everything from, like I showed you, the very simple, basically recall, right? What's at run in phase 2? What do we need to do that? Very, very easy to do that. But where I see the study coordinators really do well with it is something where, so before, let's say they get a lab kit or something. Let's say a patient had a problem with an imaging, and so the question is screen fill or re-image to see if they're eligible, right? Before, they would come to me, they would be scared to come and say, hey, how about this or about that? So now they'll go on to Sky, and they'll say, hey, Sky, write an email to the CRA, and they'll write all the email, and by the time I see the email, it's already been resolved. Amazing, right? They've now, I feel you empower them, because these are some of the smartest people in your whole institution, right? They're dealing with multiple complex projects at the same time. So that you empower them to just give them that confidence to use the right terminology, the right verbiage.
Okay, so they save time and they save us. Yeah.
Our protocol deviations went down by 40% when we implemented Sky. Wow. We were already low. Now they're almost, we always make errors. You always make errors. I still make errors all the time. You just got to make sure you catch it and you learn from it.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Dr. David. Thank you for the informative presentation. Regarding the training model that you have presented, what are the materials that are used to make them, and are they 3D printed? Thank you so much.
So that was which training materials from which one? I just missed the first part of that, sorry.
The training models that you are presenting.
Oh, the heads, right?
The eyes, correct.
Yeah, so we can make about 100 per week. They're made in Miami. They're made through a specialized team, through an IP process. And so then they kind of get built up from there. There's standard glaucoma model, but then there's also, we make them specialty for pharma, if there's a special technique. And then we also, we have with trainees, residents, and fellows, we put events all over the US throughout the year. So, so if you're coming to a major conference, you'll see NRSS at some point in the next year or so, as we partner with different groups that will bring it on, those kind of setups. And so we have, and so they all have SOPs, and so the glaucoma one will have every type of surgery, we'll have all the best practices, all the complications, and we'll have actually things that you can try.
Just one last question maybe. So you mentioned that the patients you enroll into the trial get free treatment for the treatment and the follow-up visits. How is that an incentive if they're insurance-covered patients?
Underinsurance is a big problem. Yeah, good question. So I think that for clinical trials, when you think the best market is an insured market, because there's always going to be an underinsured population that I think you can really help, and they'll seek you out and they'll help spread your vision. When I was in Canada before, Canada's not great for that because everyone has that very good healthcare, right? So there's almost not a need. You have to do a little bit of extra work. In the U.S., there's so many people just without insurance, people that can't afford healthcare. So it's this model I think could be very vibrant in that setup.
Well, I'd like to thank all the speakers for an amazing seminar and also for participating in the workshop yesterday, which was also awesome and very useful to everybody at KKish, and I'm sure all the audience will agree that the expertise that they brought in here to us will be very useful as we set up our clinical trials unit. Thank all the speakers for coming from far distances, and for David, I don't think distances matters, right, at all. But also thank the moderators for moderating the session and for the audience for their interactive participation. Thank you, everybody.